Chapter 14. Saturday morning. The next morning, Doreen woke up sore and tired again, but almost euphoric this time at the amount of work she had accomplished. She also had a new mystery to work on. As she went downstairs, she remembered that she hadn't asked Nan about the boxes from the attic above the hall closet, and she still had the rest of the closet contents to go through. But it was also past 8, and she wanted to get Millicent's gardening done. She stepped out into the garage and smiled. "Wow," she said. "Look at this. It's stunning." She wanted to open the garage door for the world to see, but did she really want the media to photograph her garage? Besides, she should cook breakfast and then do the gardening job she currently had because money still needed to come in to pay her bills. Now that she had paid a bunch of the bills, her bank account had taken a hit. But she deposited the cash for the car parts, so things were still good. She whipped up an omelet, almost laughing at how easy it was to do, and remembered the one leftover pork chop from the previous night. She wondered if she could justify eating it now, but decided it was better to save it for lunch to go with a salad or something. So, seated with her plate and the animals sitting down to eat their food, she opened her laptop and browsed the internet for a few moments looking for headline news. Unable to help herself, she searched on Google for the biker gang named Devil Riders that had made its home in Kelowna. Outside of the fact they seemed to own a ton of property in the Knox Mountain side of Kelowna, there wasn't much mention of them. At least not in the last 10 or 15 years. And that worked for her. On that note, she searched Steve Albright's name, again in reference to the Devil Riders biker gang too, because that would be interesting to find out more about. She still wanted to get through all the rest of that material that Solomon had left with her. And she hadn't even started the scanning yet today on the last 2 boxes. Refusing to leave for Millicent's until she at least got a section done, she opened the 3rd box and found they were all fairly thin files. She set herself a 30-minute deadline and worked steadily. When the minutes were up, she only had 4 thicker folders left. She finished them within another 15 minutes. She still had to rename all these scanned files, but that would be a different problem. That would require another hour, which she didn't have the luxury of using right now for that purpose. She took the 3 already scanned boxes and moved them into the office alcove area, where the scanner was. She stacked the 4th one still to be done on top. Then she opened the lid and realized these were much thicker folders and would take a longer time. Maybe tomorrow. Or maybe even when she got back this afternoon. She locked up her house, set the alarms, called the animals, and walked toward Millicent's corner. As she walked into the backyard from the side gate, she interrupted Mac and his mother sitting on the porch. She waved at them and said, "Sorry. I hate to disturb you. I just wanted to get at the work early this morning." Millicent was thrilled. She took her tea and walked to the edge of the porch. "So tell me, what's your new case all about?" She heard Mac groan beside his mom. Doreen smirked and said, "Well, we found 6 boxes in Nan's attic from what looks like a hope chest from more than a century ago, but I haven't even asked Nan yet if she knows anything about it." "A hope chest," Millicent said with awe. "That house of yours, it ended up being a treasure trove, hasn't it?" "It's been fun," Doreen acknowledged. Then she bent down and got to work on the weeding. Even just days since she'd weeded earlier, those pesky little buggers had popped up all over the place. She made a pile of weeds every so often and moved as fast and as efficiently as she could. Millicent kept talking with Doreen the whole time, wanting details of everything she'd found. When Doreen told her about the nightgowns, she looked up to see the older woman's face softening. "I remember doing things like that," she said. "I hand-stitched my first nightgown for my wedding too." Doreen laughed. "Good thing I didn't. I doubt it would have held together past the first night." Just then, she remembered Mac's words from earlier. She groaned, but of course Mac had already taken note of that and grinned at her like a madman. She glared at him, then went back to weeding. I told you that she was good, Millicent said to her son. Look at her move. How is she possibly that fast? Doreen didn't hear Mac's response, but it was likely not terribly nice. She had gotten him into a ton of trouble and had created a ton of extra work with her efficiency, so she could understand if he wasn't terribly thrilled. When she finished making her way around to the rear garden, she still had about 20 minutes left. She grabbed a bucket and scooped up all the weeds she had piled up at various spots. Then she turned to Mac and his mom and said, I'll move to the front and see how bad it is out there. On the way, she periodically stopped to pull up weeds that poked through the gravel along the sidewalk. When she reached her destination, she walked around the first garden bed. It looked pretty good, so she just grabbed a couple weeds, then headed to the second and the third beds. The third garden had been skipped the previous week, and it looked a little worse for wear. Doreen grabbed her tools and dug up some of the weeds by their roots to slow the weeds from developing again. And when her time here was up, she was pretty happy with the way it had gone. She walked to the edge and dumped the weeds into the compost bin, then told Millicent, You'll have to consider separating some of these plants or at least divide the roots and maybe come up with a way to keep the beds in check. I know the daylilies are looking mighty healthy, but after they've flowered, you might want to spread them out. Oh dear, I do. And the gladiolas. They've become such a mess. Doreen laughed. You know what? I always figured that's where they were happy. But once they start growing higher, like they are now, we should probably cut and separate them off. Maybe you can make a new garden bed along the fence. You have that odd strip of grass there. She pointed it out. I don't really see the point of it unless you want to keep it. Oh, I hate that strip, Millicent cried out. That was my husband's doing. He thought it would be nice to have some walkway around the place, but honestly, it just ended up being hard to mow. So think about it, Doreen said as she motioned along the expansive fence. We'd have to dig it out a bit and remove some of that turf, but you could certainly start splitting up a lot of the plants. I'm not sure what all else could use a bit of relief, but you can start with the daylilies and the gladiolas. And then she frowned and said, As I recall, you had a lot of tulips. We could dig up some of those and put a nice soldier row of them along the front. Millicent didn't respond, seeming to be in deep thought about it. So Doreen said, Just think about it. Nothing has to be done for a long time. Then she smiled and waved. I'm heading home now. Mac popped his head out. How come you're in such a rush today? Oh, you know, she said. Things to do, files to read. Mac called her phone as soon as she walked in her door. You'll stay out of those files, right? He asked in an ominous tone. I scanned the third box this morning, she said comfortably. I want to get that fourth one scanned too. There was silence at the other end before he grudgingly said, Okay. That makes sense. Make sure you send me a digital copy of everything you've got. I will, but I have to rename everything, and that'll take me a lot longer. I've got enough work for all of today just in doing that. Okay. Oh, and if you want to look for second-hand furniture, let me know. Will do, she said cheerfully. She set the scanner going while the coffee dripped. She studied the coffee pot, a little worried maybe she was getting addicted. She was only a little worried because, even if she was addicted, she wouldn't do anything about it. As she had found out too since leaving her soon-to-be ex-husband, one joy in her life was having coffee outside in her garden. She wasn't about to give that up. She had lost a ton of stuff when leaving him, but that was one of those little comforts that she planned to keep. As she walked into the living room, she frowned. Though she had moved the 4 boxes of Solomon's files out of here, still all the contents from the hall closet remained. She went to work sorting the multiple broom handles and brooms, then realized she should have gotten Mac's help with that too. There were wet mops, dry mops, and brooms. With the big stuff handled, Doreen separated the cat food and the dog food, then contemplated where to put it all. No need for it to be in that closet, and it certainly didn't need to be in her living room. She went back to the kitchen, opened a bunch of empty cupboards, and found a spot she thought would work perfectly. Muggs's large bags of food went in the bottom, along with Goliath's cat food, while Thaddeus's birdseed went on the shelf above. And with that nicely secured, she returned and started in on the stack of paperwork in the front closet. The animals sat beside her, watching her more curiously, more likely than not attracted by the lingering smell of food that was no longer sprawled beside her. Thaddeus made a cozy spot for himself on top of the stack of papers, which wasn't helping, but Doreen scooched a large stack from underneath his feet. Recipes, recipes, recipes. She shook her head. Nan, I didn't think you cooked that much. Also, household tips and tricks for being a good wife. Well, that could go in the garbage. She crumpled up some paper into a ball and sent it flying across the living room floor. Goliath went from 0 to 60 as he raced to whack it around farther into the dining room. She laughed at his antics. But Thaddeus didn't want to be left out. He eyed her, so she took another piece of useless paper, ripped it in half, made a smaller ball, and sent it flying for him. That started an hour of playing catch and watching the animals scatter across the room. It wasn't helping her get any work done, but it certainly helped her mood. She made it through the first stack, which was all garbage as far as she was concerned, but she did take the time to make sure nothing was important. When the Christie's people had been here, Doreen had found lots of valuable documents and then recipes too on the shelves in the pantry of her kitchen, so she wasn't sure why more recipes were in the front closet too. All the recipes should have been together. That made no sense to her. But then, nobody said Nan was thinking all that clearly these days.